It's the summer of 1940, World War II is raging, and France has fallen to Nazi Germany. The tricolor flag has been lowered in Paris, and German forces now occupy most of the country. But one of France's most powerful assets remains intact, its massive naval fleet, anchored at the port of Mers el-Kabir in French Algeria. This fleet is a ticking time bomb, and over in London, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill is agonizing over what to do. Britain now stands alone against Hitler. The United States hasn't entered the war yet, and the prospect of the powerful French Navy falling into German hands is a nightmare scenario. The French fleet was, at the time, one of the largest and most modern in all of Europe. It included powerful battleships like the Dunkirk and Strasbourg. If Hitler's Kriegsmarine could seize these ships, the entire balance of naval power in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean would shift catastrophically. German U-boats were already strangling Britain's supply lines, and adding these French warships to the German arsenal would be a devastating blow. It could very well mean the end for Britain. Churchill, known for his iron will, decided this was a risk he simply could not afford to take. The stakes were too high. So, he made one of the most ruthless and controversial decisions of the entire war. The plan was codenamed Operation Catapult. On July 3, 1940, a powerful British naval force, known as Force H, appeared off the coast of Mers el-Kabir. The British ships surrounded the French fleet, blocking their escape. The French Admiral Marcel Bruno Genzel was then presented with a shocking ultimatum. The British demanded that he choose one of several options: sail his ships to Britain and join the fight against Germany, sail to a neutral port like in the United States where the ships would be disarmed, or, as a final resort, scuttle the fleet himself, intentionally sink his own ships right there in the harbor. The French commanders were caught in an impossible position. France had just signed an armistice with Germany, and one of its terms was that the French fleet would remain under French control but be disarmed. Admiral Genzel felt bound by this agreement and his honor as an officer. He couldn't just hand over his fleet to the British, which would be a direct violation of the armistice and could lead to severe German reprisals against France. He believed the Germans would never be able to seize his ships. Negotiations dragged on for hours under the hot North African sun, but no agreement could be reached. The French refused to yield. With the deadline passed and no resolution in sight, the British commanders followed their orders. At 5:54 p.m., the Royal Navy opened fire on their own allies. The harbor at Mers el-Kabir erupted into chaos. Shells from the British battleships rained down on the docked French vessels. The ships were trapped, unable to maneuver or effectively fight back. The battleship Britannia exploded in a massive fireball, sinking with nearly 1,000 men on board. The Dunkirk was heavily damaged, and the Provence was forced to run aground. In less than 15 minutes, the pride of the French Navy was a smoldering wreck. The human cost was staggering. Nearly 1,300 French sailors lost their lives. It was a brutal, heartbreaking moment, an act of violence between two nations that had been allies just weeks before. Back in France, the news of the attack was met with shock and fury. The Vichy government, the new collaborationist regime ruling the unoccupied part of France, immediately seized the opportunity. They launched a massive propaganda campaign, painting the British as treacherous backstabbers who had murdered their former comrades in cold blood. Posters and radio broadcasts condemned the attack, fueling anti-British sentiment across the country. For many ordinary French citizens, who were already reeling from the humiliation of defeat, the attack felt like the ultimate betrayal. How could their allies do this? The incident drove a deep wedge between the two nations and pushed the Vichy government even further into Germany's arms. But what about the French resistance? While the official government condemned Britain, the secret networks of men and women fighting against the German occupation had a very different and far more complex reaction. These were the patriots working in the shadows, risking their lives every day to sabotage German operations and gather intelligence. For them, the situation wasn't just about national pride or anger, it was about the cold, hard reality of winning the war. They had to look at the bigger picture. Many resistance leaders, including the future leader of the Free French, Charles de Gaulle, who was in London at the time, understood the brutal military logic behind Britain's action. Publicly, de Gaulle expressed sorrow for the loss of French lives, but privately, he and other resistance figures recognized the strategic necessity. They knew that if Hitler had gained control of that fleet, the war might have been lost for everyone. The thought of French battleships flying the swastika and hunting Allied convoys was a horror they were glad to have avoided, even at such a terrible cost. Inside the clandestine meetings of the resistance, the debate was intense. Of course, everyone was heartbroken by the deaths of so many French sailors. They were their countrymen. But another, more strategic thought began to emerge. The attack on Mers el Kabir, as brutal as it was, sent a powerful message to the world and, more importantly, to the oppressed people of France. It was a clear and undeniable signal that Britain was not going to surrender. It proved that Churchill would do absolutely anything, no matter how difficult or distasteful, to continue the fight against Hitler. For the resistance, which was operating on little more than hope, this show of British resolve was a vital morale boost. It meant they weren't alone. It gave them a reason to keep fighting, knowing that a powerful ally was still in the game, willing to make the toughest calls to achieve victory. Quietly, they continued their coordination with British intelligence, their shared goal of liberating France overriding the pain of the incident. In the long run, the attack on Mers el Kabir, despite the immediate diplomatic fallout, achieved its primary objective. Germany was denied a massive naval advantage that could have altered the course of the war. Although it created immense tension, the relationship between the British and the Free French forces under Charles de Gaulle slowly began to heal. They were united by a common enemy, and as the war progressed, their cooperation became essential. Over time, even those within France who had initially felt betrayed came to see the grim necessity of what had happened. The resistance accepted it as a bitter pill they had to swallow for the greater good of defeating Nazism. It was a tragic family affair, but one that ultimately helped ensure the family's survival. The attack on the French fleet remains one of the most painful and controversial episodes of World War II. It was a moment where an alliance was tested by fire. Literally, it deeply wounded French national pride and cost many lives. But for the clandestine heroes of the French resistance, it was also a stark reminder of the brutal calculus of total war. It was proof that their main ally, Great Britain, was willing to be ruthless to ensure Hitler's ultimate defeat. This grim determination gave them the hope they needed to carry on their fight in the darkest of times, paving the way for the eventual liberation of their homeland. Thank you for watching. If you found this piece of history interesting, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories from the past. See you next time.